This is Solve It for Kids.
Hello, my amazing and curious friends. My name is Jennifer, the Dean of all things STEM and STEAM, and this is Solve It for Kids, the science podcast that gives kids and families a peek inside the real world of scientists, engineers, and experts as they solve problems in their jobs using creativity, cooperation, and critical thinking. And now please welcome to the show my podcast partner, Galactic Space Geek, Jeff Gagne.
Hello, Jennifer, and hello, listeners. We have a best of episode that has clips which are going to take our exploration all the way out to space.
That's right. This is going to be so exciting. So what episodes will we be hearing from today?
The best of exploring the moon.
Ooh, the best of moon exploration. One of our favorite topics, Jeff. So we will be hearing from episode 227, Dr. Julia Badger. How do you create a robot babysitter for a space station?
Fascinating episode. That's a listen to more than once.
It is. Episode 215, how will we talk to astronauts on the moon with Sirina Nabhan, which was also really interesting and cool.
Very much so, and critical information.
Yes. And the last one is episode 221, what's it like to experience zero gravity, with Tim Bailey, the in-flight manager for the Zero G Corporation, which this gives us idea what it's like to be on the moon, kind of, right?
And it's one that a lot more people have access to, which really makes it a fun episode.
Yes. So we hope you enjoy all of the clips of these best of moon exploration. Have fun.
How do you create a robot babysitter for a space station?
Ooh, how do you create a robot babysitter for a space station? Now this sounds fabulous. Who is our guest today, Jeff?
Agreed, and we have the right guest to explain it to us. We have the wonderful Dr. Julia Badger. She is, listen to this everybody, the Autonomous Systems Technology Discipline Lead at NASA. In other words, for us, a robotics engineer.
Welcome to the show, Dr. Julia.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Well, we are so excited, and anybody who's listened to the show before knows how excited I get about space robots. Yes, we're going to talk about that today. So I always like to start with, though, when you were a kid, did you like robots and build them?
Well, so when I was a kid, I didn't really know what engineering was. I had somebody, a dad, actually came into our class and taught us about like, how would you build a bike? And kind of got me thinking about those sorts of things. It was actually a lot of movies and books that moved me to what I'm doing now.
Fantastic.
I watched Apollo 13. I thought that was really cool.
Oh,
I
yeah.
wanted to solve space problems. And then I read I, Robot by Isaac Asimov.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, I want space robot problems. So that's how I ended up where I am.
That's fantastic. I love that you looked at books too, right, Jeff? Isn't that the best thing? Okay.
Absolutely. And iRobot and Isaac Asimov, great place to get started and get that imagination going. So I do want to ask, connecting reading those books when you were younger to now, was your education in that same direction, or did you end up veering off of that path and coming back to it?
No, I kind of always went towards robotics. So I decided to go to college. I went to college at Purdue and I majored in mechanical engineering. Back when I went, they said, oh, robotics isn't really a thing. That's not going to be a big field. You don't want to do this. And I'm like, I think you're wrong. And so I did it anyway. I went and got my PhD at Caltech then, also mechanical engineering and working in robotics and robotic control and autonomous control, which means independence from something, and independence from humans is where I define my autonomous systems and robots.
So can you remember what is the first robot that you worked on? Was this in college or did you like go straight to NASA to work on robots?
In high school, with my friends, we had this thing called Odyssey of the Mind where you came up with something.
I remember that. Yeah.
Really? Yeah, I loved it.
Yeah.
And so we built a robot named Jeff. And Jeff had to do 5 things, and none of us knew what to do. And so Jeff was very primitive, but he was awesome, and we loved him.
That's fantastic. I love that.
I'm feeling very warm and connected to. Little primitive, hopefully awesome, and hopefully people still like me. Okay, so just before you mentioned Jeff, you briefly gave us how you describe autonomy. When I introduced you at the beginning, you really have this big title, Autonomous Systems Technology Discipline Lead. Can you kind of break that down a little bit for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we send things to space, unless it's close, it becomes really hard to talk to from the Earth. Yes. We're talking about going to the moon. That's my job right now. And we don't expect to have communication back to Earth all the time. So if we're doing work and we want to do science and work as often as we can, we really have to do it without people being in control of it. And so we call that autonomous. And it's an autonomous system when it goes and does its own thing.
Yes, exactly.
All right. That certainly simplifies that big title.
Yes, and it makes sense because of all of the things like people are talking about AI and all of these different things. So can you just kind of talk about, does autonomous actually equal AI or how that kind of all goes together so we can explain that?
So the definition of AI differs across whom you're talking to.
That's true. That's true.
But I would say that it is not equivalent. You do not have to have artificial intelligence to have an autonomous system. It could just be automated. We use that word too, where it doesn't really imply intelligence so much, but does its own thing and is a part of what you would expect a system that's independent to do. Control loops are kind of a thing like that. You can have a smart air conditioner, right? Where it'll switch to a different temperature based on the time of day. That's autonomous. It does it by itself, but it's not AI. It's automated.
That's an important distinction. Thank you for letting us know that.
But there's a lot that we do that is needing intelligence, right? So we work on spacecraft that we want them to handle themselves all by themselves. And that's a lot more complicated than an air conditioning system on Earth. You do still have air conditioning. But if that air conditioning breaks, then you're really upset.
You're in big trouble.
You're outside, right? You can't go outside and get air. And so it ends up being a lot more technology behind that to keep that autonomous. And we do use things that border into and approach artificial intelligence. Not always machine learning, but artificial intelligence for sure.
Wow.
You are also considered the Gateway Autonomy Lead. What is Gateway?
Gateway is our lunar space station. It is going to be basically a home for astronauts that is in orbit around the moon. We are doing Gateway as part of the Artemis program. So Artemis is to send back astronauts to the moon. And instead of like we did in Apollo, where we landed, grabbed some rocks, planted a flag, came back, now we're going to stay for a while. We're going to go explore. We're going to spend 2 weeks on the surface of the moon, figuring things out. We're going to learn how to live there. And it's part of a Moon to Mars initiative. So we're really thinking about what it means to try to live on a different planet. And Mars is far away, so we'll have to live there for a while. So we're really thinking about sustainable human presence on the moon. So Gateway is a big part of that. It's kind of the place where if you know you're going to take a big trip and you don't, you got to send stuff in advance because you got to have, all your clothes and your video games. And for us, it's also your food and your air and your water because you can't buy those there. They just aren't available. So that's the place we're going to kind of put everything. We're going to have our astronauts go there and they're going to switch spacecraft. They're going to get there one way in Orion. And then they're going to switch into this other spacecraft. There's a couple of them. We call them in general the Human Landing System, and that goes down to the moon. So all of this is going to kind of meet up at Gateway. And Gateway will spend its life mostly uninhabited and hanging out around the moon. doing science and observations and doing comm relay and that sort of thing. And so my job is to make Gateway be able to run by itself for up to 3 weeks without any human talking to it. And if things break or the system needs to be maintained or you need to turn on a payload, we have to put all of those commands on board. Right now, for the International Space Station, we have 24/7, 365 mission support on the ground, sending up 900 commands a day.
Wow.
Our space station isn't much different from a system perspective, but now all those commands have to happen on board. So I'm in charge of the system that is going to do all of that commanding.
Wow.
Wow.
That's a big deal. And that is a great lead in to how do you create a robot babysitter for a space station? So I'm assuming that's kind of who's going to be running it. You're going to create this sort of robot babysitter. How do you even start with that, I think, is the big question.
Yeah, so it's fun first.
Yay!
You have to really understand
good news.
your system. Yeah, right. You have to really understand your system. So what we're kind of doing is making Gateway a robot, right? It needs to be able to do its own thing. It's going to be able to move and actuate its valves and different things then on board to be able to take care of things. We're going to be checking, monitoring, right, for health. If something breaks, we're going to know about it. We're going to take care of it. You can go all the way down to how do you really make things so the astronauts right now on the ISS have to pull out boards and put things back in and they have to move stuff around and they got to find tools. So eventually, you know, you can also consider having an actual robot caretaker.
How will we talk to astronauts on the moon?
Access online.
Will it be possible for us to talk to astronauts on the moon? Well, that's a great question, isn't it? Like, hopefully the answer is yes. So who is our guest today who's going to solve this problem for us?
We are going to get that information from the terrific Sirina Nabhan. She is systems engineer at the Deep Space Network at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory.
Welcome to the show, Sirina.
Thank you, guys. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, and so to fill in everybody on the joke, Sirina gave us, Jeff and I, an amazing tour of NASA JPL, and it was so fantastic. We learned so many cool things, so we had to have her on the show.
I'm so happy you guys came to JPL at that time because Europa Clipper, the spacecraft that you saw when you were there, actually got shipped out, and it's no longer visible.
I
won't
know.
be back here until May. Yeah,
I know. That was
lucky.
Perfect timing. So now what we like to ask is, so you do all these cool things with space. You do work with the Deep Space Network, which we're going to talk about in a second. Were you a kid who always dreamed of working with space things or going to space?
So as a kid, I actually didn't even think engineers could be working on spacecraft. I thought astronauts did everything. I thought engineers were fixing trains and putting in electricity. It wasn't until late in high school that I watched the Cosmos, Carl Sagan's Cosmos.
Oh, yeah.
And that was just a classic. And I fell in love with all things space. And I was lucky enough to live near Pasadena, California. So I was able to go to one of my first open houses at JPL. And just made me think, okay, I have got to be in this space world.
That's fantastic.
I like that. So you caught on late in high school. What did you end up going to college to study?
So same thing. When I went to college, I just kind of wasn't sure what an engineer did, but I was like, okay, I need to study a STEM degree. You know, I'd like to study math because I know I'll have a job when I graduate if I study STEM. So I kind of went into it, not thinking about it too deeply, but I had an amazing physics teacher. She really made me love electricity and magnetism. I actually failed the first time I took her class.
Oh.
I don't recommend it, but I'm very lucky to have such a inspiring and welcoming teacher. And she encouraged me to take it another year, and I aced it the second time around and really fell in love with the subject. From talking with her, I realized that I wanted to be an electrical engineer because she just asked me what I wanted to do with my life, what I wanted to graduated, and I fell right into it.
electrical engineering is really cool, but we introduced you as a systems engineer. So maybe could you tell us the difference between that and how you got from one to the other?
Yeah, that's a great question. So systems engineering is a type of engineering, but it's not something you can study in college yet.
Oh,
That's because systems engineers come from all different kinds of backgrounds. They could be mechanical engineers, chemical engineers, aerospace engineers. It's pretty much an engineer that understands how multiple systems work together.
Ah, I see.
I specifically work on software systems that are ingested into multiple sub-assemblies that make up one big system. So think kind of like a tree, and it has multiple branches, and each of those branches kind of touch a little bit of. And a systems engineer's job is to make sure that all of these smaller parts integrate into the bigger part, and we're able to efficiently and quickly get to our goal of building the overall system.
I love the tree analogy.
Yes,
that works, doesn't it, Jeff?
Yeah. What a great analogy. That really connects it for my brain, because you hear systems engineer a lot, and I don't think anybody outside of engineers really knows what they're doing, but that really puts it together. It actually makes me feel like I have a smart question now. With your systems engineering and that tree analogy with the little pieces and the big pieces, which part of the process is more difficult? Is it the planning beforehand to try to figure out what all the little pieces you're going to need? Or is it afterwards putting them all together to make sure they work together?
That is a very smart question. And that was actually the birth of systems engineering. So you don't find systems engineering before there used to be factories. So the invention of factories and kind of the overall machines getting larger made there a need for systems engineering, because people were wasting money, time, and effort building things separately. And then once they put them together, they realized it didn't work. So I would say the systems engineering, it's kind of this practice of, hey, let's do all of this legwork, let's prepare, and let's take our time and ensure that everyone knows what's going on before we go and throw ourselves into the project. And hey, sometimes there is replanning. Nothing is perfect, but at least we'll have to replan a little bit less.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense. Okay, so that kind of leads into, so the question is will it be possible for us to talk to astronauts on the moon one day? But you work with the Deep Space Network. So can you kind of tell us a little bit about the Deep Space Network first, and then kind of go into talking to astronauts maybe?
Sure. So the Deep Space Network is a collection of antennas that are placed all around the world, strategically placed 120 degrees from each other, so that as the Earth rotates, we have constant coverage of over 45 different spacecrafts. These antennas are the only thing that we can use when something goes beyond the moon. That's what we consider deep space.
Okay.
And these antennas are pretty much, they kind of work like a cell phone tower, but they're big. They're about 70 meters, 340 feet, very high-powered antennas, very high-powered antennas that are literally listening to whispers from space. So think high power, low frequency.
Wow.
Okay. So using the Deep Space Network, there are 3 of them, and it's to have full-time coverage of any spacecraft be out beyond the moon. So that means every spacecraft that's ever gone out to Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, beyond, they are all communicating through these 3 satellites?
Exactly. And that's a great segue, because for the first time in almost 50 years, we'll be using the Deep Space Network to again communicate with astronauts. The last time that a man was on the moon was in 1972, and nobody has stepped on the moon since then. And we are planning to send people back to the moon. And before landing them on the moon, we're going to put them into this really elongated orbit that's further than any place that anyone has ever gone before, kind of on the dark side of the moon. And to do that, we need these high-powered, low-frequency antennas, because up until now, we've only been communicating with astronauts on the International Space Station, or the ISS. And we use the near-Earth network for that, because they're pretty close to us. They're between Earth and the moon. So I'm really excited to talk about the Artemis mission.
Yeah, so that's what I was going to ask you about that. So can you tell our listeners kind of about the Artemis mission and what's planned for that?
Yes, so Artemis was given its name because the Greek mythology goes that Artemis was the sister of Apollo.
Yes.
So just like when we went to the moon, we're going back, but this time we're going to go to stay. So NASA is planning this multi-part mission, Artemis 1 to, I believe, 7 right now, but it will span over 40 years of us getting people to the moon, getting the first woman to walk on the moon, and building moon bases and the foundation for people to come back to the moon and have the moon be a waypoint for us to stop at before we get to Mars. All kinds of people are teaming up, international partners, commercial partners with NASA to be able to build cool machines like this rover I'm working on called Viper. Viper is this lunar rover that will have a titanium drill, a 5-foot drill that will go into the moon's surface and extract water in the form of ice. And it's going to help astronauts make fuel while they're on the moon, so they don't have to pack their own fuel when they leave Earth.
What's it like to experience zero G?
What is it like to experience zero G? Now, I don't know if I have thought about doing this or if I'm okay with doing this, but I'm really excited to learn about someone who does this all of the time. So who is our guest today, Jeff?
Our guest today is the terrific Tim Bailey. He is in-flight manager for the company Zero G.
Welcome to the show, Tim.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, and we are thrilled to have you. We're going to be talking about zero gravity, which is really microgravity, and how you do it in a plane and all of these different things. Oh my gosh, there's so much space happening today. So I'm curious, as a kid, did you always want to go to space?
I did. So, yeah, I always wanted to be an astronaut growing up. And I never thought I would be a flight attendant on the way to that career goal. But it turns out it's the perfect place to be. I get to train astronauts. I get to be in charge of safety in the cabin of our aircraft while we're taking people up to train and to do research. So it's actually given me more microgravity time than some of the early astronauts were able to get on their actual space missions.
Oh, that's crazy.
I was just thinking that as you were describing it. If you're the one that's on the plane all the time training them, you're doing it way more than they are. What is your first memory for you of getting that experience?
Oh, goodness. So I've been working for Zero Gravity Corporation for 21 years now. I actually started as an intern for the company.
Okay.
Yeah, we weren't even flying at that point. So I got to come down and help put the plane together. So one of my earliest memories is really of being on the plane when we were still deciding like what parts to put into it and how to do lights and things, and getting to see something I had never thought about before, which was how aircraft are maintained and all the parts and panels that get pulled off. So my first experience was really the guts and the inside of the airplane, which was fascinating. And I knew nothing about it.
Okay, so can you tell everyone who maybe isn't familiar with Zero G, like, what is this program and, how does it involve the plane?
Sure. So Zero G is a commercial space tourism company. We offer people the experience of weightlessness. So we have an aircraft, a modified 727 aircraft. So it's an older model airplane that used to run passengers and then cargo. And we take and climb and dive that aircraft in what's called a parabolic arc. So it's just a gentle curve that goes up, crests, and then comes right back down the other side, symmetrical curve that we fly it in. And during that parabolic arc, we know how to fly it exactly right by hand so that everything is in free fall as we come over the top of that. So if you can imagine that you're going that line, right as you're starting to go up, they pull the engines back, they tilt the nose down, and everything in the plane is falling right with the plane over the top and then down the other side. Yeah. It's the exact same physics as being in space. Everything is falling up and over at the same rate. So inside the cabin, nobody's stuck to the floor. We're all falling at the same rate. So it's in zero G. That's what we think of as weightless, because we're all falling at the same rate. So we can push around, learn how astronauts move in space. Researchers get about 30 seconds for each of these parabolas.
Oh my gosh.
science experiments or test procedures. So we fly the plane, we do a series of those arcs up and down in those parabolas, give people 6 or 7 minutes of microgravity time. And then we land just like any other aircraft. So taking off and landing, we do just like any other plane. It's just when we're up in the sky, we do these neat parabolic arcs to give us the time that we need in free fall.
Wow. And you let people out of the seats for that, right? Because, like we're all used to regular plane travel where, sit still and buckle in, but you let them actually float around?
Oh, yeah. Well, up to 10,000 feet, we have all those same rules. I actually have to do the oxygen mask demo and fasten seatbelts while seated, those kinds of things. But once the captain turns the fasten seatbelt sign off, it changes dramatically because we really take those seatbelts off. So the front 2/3 of the aircraft, about 66 feet of that plane, is all padded. So floor, ceiling, walls, everything is padded on it. So we pull everybody out from the seats, and up front, we actually take people's shoes away unless they're doing some scientific research. Who knows what kind of shoes you wore that day?
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
We don't want people floating around, and it's unusual. It's something different that people aren't used to. So we really try to make it as comfortable and safe for them as possible. And part of that is taking shoes and bagging them up and storing them and strapping them down because the whole plane is in free fall. The pilots, everyone in the cabin, everything in the aircraft. So we have to be really careful that we don't leave something out on a seat or leave a drawer open in our flight attendant compartment because things will float away just like they do in space.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. Okay. So I also want to jump right in. You said you do a series of these arcs, about 30 seconds each, and you're giving each of your passengers 6 to 7 minutes, which means you're doing quite a few. I imagine a lot of people are not very tummy comfortable with this situation. Would that be accurate?
That's not as accurate as you would think. So I know that when NASA did these flights, they got a reputation for people being sick on them a lot. And NASA flew researchers. So that was their goal, was to get research done. And so they were focused mostly on, we need to maximize the amount of time we can give to researchers. I don't care how you're feeling. I don't care if you're having fun. That's not why you're here. And so we've learned over time how to do things to help people acclimate better to the microgravity environment and to that up and down motion, like we were saying. Because when you're in microgravity, you're floating around, you're doing some aerobics. But on the bottom part of that curve, we actually pick up all of that momentum that we had falling, and we have to burn that off and pull back up into the next one, much like you would feel at, say, the bottom of a roller coaster, right? You've got all of that momentum going down, and you then have to pick it all back up and go up the next hill. So we experience about 1.8 Gs, so about 1.8 times your body weight. So we have everyone lay on those mats on the floor for that. And sometimes that's what gets people, is that moving back and forth. But we give people the opportunity to eat a light breakfast that we've curated to know that it's a good thing for people to have. And we also start them off with some lunar or Martian gravity parabolas first. We can actually shallow out our dive a bit and make it feel like you're on the moon or like you're on Mars when you're inside the plane. So that would be, if you're on Mars, that would be 3/5 of your weight.
Okay.
Right.
About 1/3. And then if you're on the moon, you're at about 1/6 of your weight. So it lets people start to feel, and their brains start to process this new experience that they're having where they don't need to push as hard. Things move at a different speed than what they're used to. So that's part of the way we acclimate people. And NASA did not do that. They were not interested in
They're all about the science, man.
Right.
Yeah.
We also know to cap it at a certain number of parabolas so that people feel good when they get off the plane, unless they're doing research, and need that scientific data that they're getting from there.
Very cool. I have known about the zero-G flights for a while now, but I did not know until just now that you could adjust it for Martian gravity or moon gravity. That is really neat to learn.
It is. It's also the only way that you can really get those gravities on Earth, that you can simulate those well enough for researchers to do things like fluid experiments or dust experiments. So they've got simulated lunar dust that they can then kick up and watch how it falls or whether it sticks to the wheels. So it's really fundamental science that they get to do, even though they only have 30 seconds or so to do it.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. So, Can you tell us about some of the experiments that they've done? Because 30 seconds is not a whole lot of time to do something. I'm assuming maybe they do it repeatedly, so like they get more data over the 6 or 7 minutes.
Exactly. So usually the researchers are dividing up the task into some small pieces that they're looking at. We've had people that were doing things like chilling fluid lines. They were looking at making rockets and knowing that the rockets would have to reignite their engines once they were in space.
Right.
Once you're in orbit, everything's in free fall and the fluid doesn't stay at the bottom of the tank.
Yes.
And so how do they pull fluid from a tank up into the fluid lines? Those fluid lines don't stay cold the same way. So how do they make sure that they get gas or liquid that they're looking for and not the wrong thing?
Yes, the best of moon exploration is definitely some favorite episodes.
Yes.
And there are so many different topics that go into moon exploration. We strongly recommend you go back and listen to all 3 of the full episodes, numbers 227, 215, and 221.
Yes, and you can find them all on our website, solveitforkids.com, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. That's where we are. And don't forget to check out on our website, each episode has its own page, so you can learn more about the scientists involved and also see book recommendations for kids that actually want to take a deep dive into the subject themselves.
This will be the last best of episode for this break. Jen and Jeff will be back with all new episodes to start a brand new season. Until next time, you'll hear Jen and Jeff on the Science Podcast for Kids and Families.
Solve it for kids.